So we have a very distinguished panelists today. Each of them are star in their own field. I don't have to really go through their detailed bio. It's in your handbook. We have Brad Hoff on the right. He's the entrepreneur, a long-term IT entrepreneur and a veteran champion in IT. You might be knowing he is an expert of chief NICTA and many other organizations. So we have consultant to the private and public industry and have been involved in this IT industry for long, Dr. Nigel Nutt, and one of the veteran CIO, very successful CIO in Australian government, Department of Agriculture, Graham Davenport. And we have the academic panel. We have Professor Jill Slade, who is the director of Australian Cybersecurity Institute, recently established in UNSW Canberra. Professor Shirley Gregor, Associate Dean and Head of Information System in Australian National University. Unfortunately, we had casualty of one member, Professor Patrick Finnegan. He couldn't arrive, as I mentioned this morning. We had a bad flu. So, thanks to Ed Lewis, who has volunteered to fill this gap. So, I don't have to, my role as a moderator will be minimum because we don't want to miss out the important talk from this very distinguished panelist. So, the idea is to start with a 2 to 3 minutes overview from each of the panelists. Then you can start discussion, then we will take questions from the floor as well. Okay, so starting from
Well, thanks, Mark. I've got to say, it's very strange sitting opposite Ed Lewis, and the liquid in front of you is clear. It's usually red. Look, pleased to be here today. The challenge that you're examining here of collaboration between end users and research is a very tough gig, let me tell you. The University of New South Wales, the ANU, the Government of New South Wales and the Government of ACT started the Centre of Excellence in 2001. The biggest challenge that we had at NICTA was to drag fantastic research across and commercialise it, and to get the right sort of a process to get that out the door. NICTA now actually produces about a company every 3 months. The research is been doing when it goes out. So the challenge that you're going to be looking at is a very real one. I guess one of the things that in 1997 there was an innovation summit, and they said out of that came NICTA. I guess what we promised the government to do is to not make NICTA a university. Why did we say that? Because the universities have their big traditions about research and so on. They write research papers and go forward. And the nature of a researcher is a very kind of, I'm here looking at real problems and trying to solve them and write research papers. And on the back of research papers, there are more research papers and so on. And there is often not much of an incentive to take that research out. That's the challenge we have at NICTA. We don't have that university attitude. We basically want to get the research out there as soon as possible, doing good things for the community. And NICTA's been doing that. Collaboration with industry. In some ways, the government and industry are also not very good from the other end to find things and commercialise. If a government department produces a really neat system, it kind of stays in the government department. Its IP value goes down over the years and nothing's ever done about it, whereas it may be able to be commercialised. And bureaucracies are just as bad at commercialising as just about everybody else. All right, so where do you start when you want to try and solve this problem? My suggestion, and at NICTA this is what they're kind of doing at the moment, start by finding the problem. Start by finding the problem. You've got really intelligent people in research institutions. Throw the problem at the researchers and see what they come up with. And then if it comes out as a product or a new service, you can get, if it's good, there's a win-win in it for everybody, then you'll get commercial money. Well, that's my observation about this.
Thank you.
Look, it's a pleasure to be here, and can I just say what a wonderful topic you've got as well. I'm very interested in having both a research background and also fundamentally as a practitioner in the field, albeit not in specialisation in information systems. Our business does work for government in the implementation of large-scale policy reforms, major initiatives. We also help to bridge the gap between what the policymakers look for and what the information system specialists or the ICT specialists end up building and delivering. So on the concept of bridging academia and industry, and also I suppose the key word there, which is collaboration. I suppose I've reflected on this across 3 dimensions. First of those is the people dimension, and the people dimension asks the question fundamentally: how do you build and create people that bring and can leverage both the academic excellence that institutions like this produce, but also can then apply it in the world in which problems are actually solved. So that's the first question. We look at it from both a recruiting perspective, who we recruit, why we recruit them, and what skills they bring to the table. And there is a shift over time to look as employers to people that bring not just depth of expertise, but also breadth of capability, adaptability, flexibility, communication skills, and fundamental analytical skill sets. The second aspect of people that we reflect on is also how to create and shape career pathways for people. It doesn't necessarily mean once I've finished my time in academia, that's it, my career now is wholly either in academia as a specialist or in industry as a practitioner. More and more it's good to see, and we look for people that can show us an ability to actually step between one and the other, and therefore cross-fertilise skill sets and the expertise in one domain with the applied position in the other domain. And we see examples of where our own people will in fact leave us for a period of time, maybe some years at stage, to pursue research or to pursue work overseas, for example, and rather than cut the umbilical, we look forward to bringing them back at a later point in time where that can be shared with us. So collaboration and cross-fertilisation over a career pathway is the second aspect of that. And I suppose the third aspect of that is where you see situations and examples where academic specialists actually work and position themselves within organisations for periods of time, either set periods of time or on a longer term basis. I remember as a young engineer myself returning from working overseas, the organisation I picked was the one where my professor from university was actually based there 2 days a week. He was the expert on tap, if you like, and that influenced me highly in terms of where I looked to build my career. The second thing, very briefly, is outside the people dimension, is in fact commercial relationships. There's a spectrum there. At one end of the spectrum is that tactical set of commercial relationships between point to point, where organisations like mine might team up with an academic or research institute in order to pursue a particular problem. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have those long-term strategic partnerships that research institutes have. Cooperative research centres produce those, and they're wonderful true forms of collaboration. I think what's often forgotten is there's actually a middle ground there that can be pursued more around more commercially orientated strategic partnerships, alliance-based contracting that's not seen a lot in government, but certainly seen a lot in the resources and engineering sector, but also performance-based relationships that help institutions work towards an outcome that's definable and has a commercial aspect to it. And I suppose the third dimension to think about is thought leadership. How can you collaborate purely in the space where academic work is published for an audience that is in fact non-academic in its own right? But the other end of the spectrum, often I see in some of the journals that I read around project management, sometimes very fluffy commentary and very fluffy statements that really aren't founded upon evidence. So I think there's also a middle ground there where thought leadership can be published, both in the published domain, but also in symposia such as this, where research and practitioner knowledge can be applied in a more direct set of circumstances.
Thanks, Nate.
I'm very happy to be here too. I guess I'm going to bring a slightly more public sector and pragmatic view to how my mind is on academia versus industry. I'm going to go back a bit, and I quite a number of years ago when I first arrived in Canberra. I was working for an organisation that was in those days called DSD. My colleague, the deputy CIO, and I used to go around in those days and sprinkle money to academia, do research topics for us, in particular areas of interest to investigation of signals intelligence capabilities. Working with the DSTO, the Defence Science and Technology Organisation, which is very much like academia. They were always developing capability for the last a lot of years. I would say quite a lot of years. I've been pretty much a CIO, and I have to say the one thing that I really support, I love, is graduates. So you don't only have to do research topics, but you want to think about your output from the organisation, and that is hopefully the students that graduate. Because for me, they bring a fresh view on everything. When I arrived where I currently am, the average age of my staff was over 50. Unfortunately, when I arrived, I pushed it way up. But I can tell you, since then, I've had a program of graduate recruitment. We're averaging 3 or 4 graduates a year. It's only a small organisation, but they just bring such a refreshing change. The one thing I'll say about when you bring graduates to an organisation that's at the front end of having to deliver things, what do I do for the first 2 years? I spend time teaching them how to do IT at the sharp end, at the real end of where you produce something. So the question I ask is, I worked with Medicare for many years, and I used to produce graduates who work in a mainframe environment and a big range environment. What university, I ask you, if you don't know, consider this question, produces graduates who can walk straight into a job and work in a mainframe environment? Not many. Right now, very small shop, we're all mid-range, x86, Microsoft rules, Oracle rules. How many universities produce graduates who are experts in stacks? I've got a young man over here that I spoke to before. He has been very interested in enterprise service functions. Those are the sort of things that I'm looking for. Is somebody who can walk in, hit the ground running, rather than spend the first 2 years teaching how things are done in the real world. Because we're not all that rich, and we are using technology to get older. That's about all I have to say.
Thanks, Graham. There are very important points to take for the academics. I think that they will be applying it later. And now the 2-3 minutes opening comments of Mr. Tuesday.
Okay. My opening comments in some ways are a response to you because I'm an engineer who went into qualitative research for the PhD. I was doing very interesting things, but perhaps I was answering questions that only academics wanted to know. And after 9/11, when terrorism and cyber-terrorism became prominent, I just started working in IT security, and I was actually, I'm the director of what we have as a Australian Centre for Cyber Security. But in my previous job at the University of South Australia, when I'm talking as that I was a professor of forensic computing. So I got my engineer's mind to developing a new area, and I followed what each of you had said actually. I saw that there was an urgent need to create a workforce that could actually go out there and do the job when they graduated, even with a 3-year degree. It's easier if you've got them for the 4th year, and it's lovely when you've got PhD students who you can work with for another 3 years or so. So what I have done is I've made myself industry relevant. I've got certifications myself, so that I'm actually employed. I think that's step one. If you actually believe that it's important to bridge industry and academia, I was told by my American mentor that you've got to prove yourself credible. So the first thing I did was do that CISSP certification, which some people may know, but you have the 6-hour multiple choice test. And then I've gained other certifications because that means that industry know who I am. And then not only do they trust my judgments, they trust my students. On the other hand, to please my university, I've still got to do all the normal traditional outputs. And because I was a pioneer in forensic computing, perhaps it was easier for me. My previous postdoc used to complain, Jill, I can't do what you do because you've got, an HMX 11 and you're a professor, but I need to have, more proof of citations than you, and I accept that. But what I've done with my students and the methodology I've used is I can create software engineers who can create solid, sound forensic software. My fourth years were all going to BA Systems in Adelaide, then they could go and work, they could code. But I gained all the requirements from industry. So even when they started doing the honours, I'd drag them out to industry wearing a suit, and we'd go through the whole focus group thing. And then you can grow a whole generation of them, and then you can grow a whole generation of PhD students. So I know exactly where each one of my PhD students is, and they've been in DSD, and they're in DSTO, they're in law enforcement, people with PhDs in forensic labs. And so I have a model which I believe works, and I would like to transfer here. The only problem is the one that you all know about, is that and especially because I'm in an ATM university, which is much more technical, in a group of 8 university, there's much more pressure to create these theoretical outputs, or what could be answering the made-up questions, which may not actually be relevant to your work. And so I reckon that what we have to do is have a balance between theoretical work, which proves that we are as good as we say we are, and the practical work that we're doing. So that's the path I'm going down here. So I'm in a good position with a good budget. So I will hire other people who are far more theoretical than me, whose work is so mathematical that I may not actually understand it myself, because then they can get A-star journals. But the rest of us and maybe, I don't know if the split is with the people who I've gathered around, but there will be some of us who will create the outcomes that you need. And I have no other strong belief than this. This is the way to go. And for those who worry, can you get grants this way? I've had 9 Category 1 grants, including a future fellowship, so I think it works. I think it works. So I'm always happy to share how you do this, because it doesn't only work in forensic computing. It works in other disciplines where you can create a niche where there is a theoretical component and also a practical outcome.
One thing I forgot to mention that most of the panelists here, you see, they have a crossover between the two worlds, and they are extremely knowledgeable and capable to handle this from that perspective. So now, Professor Shirley,
Okay, thank you, Ahmed. I agree with much of what's been said already, and so I'll just take a slightly different tack. Now, you saw the figures that Ahmed put up there about how many IT projects fail. What is it regularly? 30%, 40%? If we were engineers and building bridges and we had 30 or 40% of our bridges fall down, what would people think? What would happen to us as a discipline? What would happen to us personally? But recently we had a case in Queensland where the Queensland payroll system was an absolutely spectacular failure. Because of that, the government has less money to spend on health, so people are actually going without proper health treatment because an IT system failed. Now, these systems, that failure was to do with IT governance. It's not to do with the hard end when we don't pay. It's us, it's the information systems people. So that was really a failure to do with management of information systems. Now, can I ask, how many people here feel any personal responsibility for things like this happening? Okay, so what are we doing wrong? What could we do better? And if we look at the research we do, I mean, I've got my own particular passion about this, which many of you know about, which I spend a lot of time on. But a lot of the research we do, which is what's demanded in our journals, is what we call behavioural science research. So we study how people use systems and And at the end of the paper, we tack on something, practical relevance, and we say, this may be of use to managers. Has anybody ever checked to see whether anything you've written has ever been cited in something in a practitioner journal? I did a study of this once. It was something like less than 1% of the work we produced in our top journals ever reached practitioner journals. So I think we have partly a knowledge production problem, it's partly more a knowledge production problem, I think. And some people do behavioural science research that transfers over to practice. Ron Webber's one example. He does very sound, very rigorous work on data modelling techniques, does experiments, gets published in top journals, and if you look, you can see that it's passed on into the literature. Data modelers, people who design data modelling languages, will use the results of his work. So that's one place where it's been successful. But the rest of the time, you would wonder, what are we doing? Maybe advancing our own careers, but are we really doing work to help the world? And of course, if any of you know the sorts of things I write, I think we're far better off to be not doing behavioural science research, but to go back and have more of us doing design science research or action design research where we actually address real problems in the world. And that sort of work can be academically respectable if you do it well enough. So a couple of papers recently that got Best Paper Awards for design science research. I mean, it's what computer science has done all along. In information systems somewhere, I think we large part lost our way, got mixed up with management. We use other sorts of techniques, got mixed up with the behavioural sciences, have forgotten that we are a design discipline. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
Well, everyone else must be right because I agree with them. Very, very objective statement, of course. I've been here for 28 years as an academic, and I've probably written a handful of papers primarily because my students have written the papers, and I, of course, being like most people, made sure they put my name on the paper, which is part of the game that you have to play as an academic these days. But my real interest has been taking Levine's comment that there's nothing more practical than a good theory, and then putting it into practice in order to solve industry problems. So I've been involved in about 40 projects outside, and have long learned that it takes you 2 days of consultancy or about a 5-day training course to make up for the gap between a senior lecturer and associate professor annual salary. And that requires about $400,000 worth of consultancy time to forego in order to write enough papers to be promoted. So it's one of the reasons why I've never been promoted. But personally, I can't afford to be promoted. So that's the view that I take. Now that's a very commercial orientation that I don't necessarily encourage that our young academic researchers follow. It just happens to be my balance between fun, family, fortune and freedom, the motivations of life. It is interesting to see that in academia things are changing toward that point of view. As Shirley mentioned, it's now acceptable to use design science research and to follow what she calls the theory of design and action. That is, build it, see if it makes a difference, use that as an evidence to support the practical nature of theory, but most importantly, provide something that actually is an improvement on how things are operating. And of course, the secret of success is making sure that somebody pays you for doing that research. And it is interesting to see also that the university is moving far more towards the exploitation of their own intellectual property in a more commercially attractive way. University of New South Wales now is beginning to say they'll provide more support for contributions to professional societies, provide the research backing behind people like IDSMF and the SARCA and so on. And also, of course, we are now getting more commercial in the research through such activities as our researcher and business grants, or of course the link grants that are meant to be collaborative between the university and business, solving a business problem. The government then supports that on a dollar-for-dollar basis to to encourage the development of the research excellence whilst providing benefit to business. And last week, Tim and I were at what they called it a sandpit, which was a discussion between UNSW researchers and a bank, looking at, this is the first of three, where they're looking at particular problems that the bank is facing to see whether the university researchers can help them with their problem. And of course, one hopes that will lead them to a further involvement, and whether it goes for a $15,000 grant for a particular issue, or whether it's a research or a business type grant, whether it's a bigger link grant, well, that to come as the relationship builds between the academic people there and the banking people who are there. And so the university has also changed its arrangements around intellectual property. So now, of course, they have certain IP which they're really, in effect, giving away for free, rather than the olden days of sitting on it and saying, well, we'll exploit it and we'll have the patents and we'll provide licenses to other people and make lots and lots of money to support the university. Now they're far more liberal in the way they're trying to encourage business to make use of the intellectual property, which is, after all, paid for by the public already through the academic salaries and so on. And so there's a far more of a move towards trying to increase the engagement between industry and business. The problem is all the innovation that studies have shown in Australia, the problem is not so much at the university end, the problem is at the business end. And similarly for the John Sheridan's material, the reason why a lot of IT projects fail is not necessarily from the technical excellence of the people doing the project, it's from the shifting requirements and poor governance of the steering committees who are the responsibility of the business side of things. We teach our people if they have good project management, and one thing we can't teach them is how do they deal with problems within the business caused by poor business practices. We're hoping to do better in that sort of area. So that's the research side of things. In terms of the teaching side, I think that's where we're not nearly as well engaged with industry. We try to have projects that are real, that are given to us by industry people, primarily defence, of course, is our primary industry that we're supporting. But point's been made, I don't think we're necessarily teaching things which are mentally industry useful. We're teaching things which might be useful for someone to go on into a research career, and we're teaching things that we like to teach because it's part of our research, but not necessarily as useful. For example, teaching people about IoT or BYOD or cloud and so on, well, they're barely appearing on our curriculum. That's got to change.
Thanks, Ed. And actually, before the academics point out, the industry pointed out, academics are recognizing their shortcomings, and it's a good way of studying. And before we open up the floor, and now I'll give you the opportunity to each of these panels so that you can ask direct questions if you have them. So you can ask questions to academics can ask questions to investors.
Can I make a statement?
Yeah, sure.
I agree with that. The issue with what John Sheridan put up there has got nothing to do with academia. It's strictly associated with behavioural sciences, associated with poor governance. You can't teach that without the experience as you go through reading. And I don't know how academia or anybody is going to address that as a topic of learning outside. But I agree that I think it is a behavioural science issue. It's a very good organisation.
So that probably illustrates what there are a couple of channels where we can contribute to society industry in general. One is obviously direct research support, industry support through education programs for short course and long course. But the other is reflected in John Sheridan's area. He was quoting in his talk the problems of the governance of projects or of IT within an organisation. He's quoting Australia. standard, ISO standard 38500, which is the corporate governance of IT. That, John was on the committee as a representative of Defence at the time, that prepared that Australian standard, which then became an international standard, one of the most popular international standards that have been put out in this sort of area around the corporate governance of IT. But I chaired that. So that from the academic background, and John and the many other people on that committee were able to bring together some of the theory to support the experiences they had in order to provide a standard which is really a reflection of best practice. It's not a compliance standard, it's not a compatibility standard, it's a best practice standard and so on. And so through that standard, we were trying to improve the corporate governance. And now there's Australian Standard 8016, which is looking at the steering committee project. And Raymond's here somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Raymond was also a part of that committee as well. The Australian committee that produced the standards which became international and so on. So we can try and through other routes to bring together the industry experiences and the academic relevant rigor, shall we say. But this is still a long drawn-out fight, because as John was obviously showing, we might have the standard, but there's another story about getting people to follow it.
So it's an interesting point, and I'm happy to have this discussion. But John also mentioned that he comes from the organisation that created the rule that any IT project over $10 million has to go through a gateway process that they themselves created, that they themselves oversee, and make sure those projects meet their guidelines. And yet still, that figure, or those stats appear on the screen, despite a government body overseeing and applying those regulations, they've been unable to change it.
And not only that, but it's come from the department which has failed its own background reviews.
Exactly.
With their own projects. It's now being made responsible for one of their projects which has failed in other areas. So it is a case of physician guild ourselves, very much. So it's a fruitful area of study to see why these problems have continued.
I could give you examples from digital forensic computing, working for about 10 years with law enforcement to develop the standards to allow them to, or to use the standards to allow them to accredit their own labs. And so I use people's research, PhDs, which cross disciplines a bit, nobody seems to mind, to actually produce new knowledge which can give best practice. And then all you can do is deliver your best practice to the most senior policemen you can find. You can offer them workshops. You can offer to stand with them while they adopt the best practice, and then you go back 2 years later and they said it was wonderful work. It's just a bit too complicated for us, Jill. We're still doing what we used to do, you know? And I have become pragmatic about it. Is that I will do my absolute best. I will serve them, and if they, at the end of the day, I can't change their culture, I will have done my absolute best. And sitting now inside UNSW Canberra, I'm following my colleague here who's taking me into the dark round of defence, and we'll just do the same here, and with the contractors as well. We can't change it 100% because as idealists we want to, but if we make 20% difference, that's obviously stuff.
So I have a question, sorry.
No, that's fine.
I have a question. You just mentioned standard, ISS. How many people in the public service do you think are well, it's
Three.
Two of us now. So they might be part of the problem too.
So I've come back to Shirley. So do you want to respond that whether these skills can be passed on to the students and governors that
I don't know if they've done my class, basic level in that standard, because we teach it in multi-governance area. So again, I think it's primarily, but honestly, the problem's very hard, but I think in the first point I was making before, we don't address it enough. We can see these problems are there, keep saying they're there, we're still looking at academia. knowledge perspective, which is what I'm interested in, I don't see serious shifts. So I see some. I'd rather listen.
Maybe I can contribute a little bit. I started the commercial division of computer sciences here many years ago, and we used to do fixed price jobs, and we used to do time and material jobs. And whenever we did a time and material job, of course, at the end of the contract for a time period, it was only 90% done, so we had to get another contract. And we overran and overran. With the fixed price contract, everybody's very enthusiastic about it. And the customer says, oh, well, I've fixed price here. I'll try to get a few more things done. And they used to insert more requirements. You know about this? More requirements in, and every week there'd be a change management meeting and there'd be a big fight about it. Of course, the contractor would say, oh, that's going to cost a lot more because we've got to do all this and all that sort of stuff. So the culture of contracting also interferes with the way that you can run a project, the way you manage it. Solve that problem. That's good research work. You solve that problem.
Thank you.
I suppose one of the questions I find interesting as well is on the business side or the industry side, it's not a, you know, governance is comprised of both the IT specialists but also the policy makers and the business decision makers themselves who frequently know nothing about the technology but are being asked to put in place that. I suppose one of the questions is how can you better bridge the divide within, importantly in the public sector, but also within industry, so that your policymakers and your business decision makers better understand the technology, better understand what it is that they're actually putting in place, what the risks and implications are of the technology working or not working. Because they're the ones often sitting on some of these big decision governance forums about whether we extend the date or whether we push hard and try and roll out a release date on a certain time without necessarily realising the implications. So I suppose I put it as a question rather than as a statement, but it's seen commonly in the public sector is there's a huge divide between those that actually put in place and deliver the policy and those that actually build the systems to make the policy actually work.
So one thing is clearly evident that knowledge is not flowing from downward to another word. That was from the discussion. Now we will open the floor.
So I want to
please your name and affiliation of the question.
So Arthur, ethnographic viewpoint, like when we look at engineering, historically and many a time the practice precedes theory. And as it progresses, people try to interpret the practice and provide a kind of theoretical scaffolding, and eventually this theory goes back into the practice as a best practice. So what information systems, unfortunately or fortunately, borrow theories from all the other disciplines except engineering. And the biggest trouble here is that it's nothing wrong to borrow the disciplines, but the detrimental aspect is that IS theoreticians are totally ignoring or looking down the practitioner. But the other way around, if you look at any practitioner, they respect academic people.
I entirely agree, and my talk this afternoon will probably go into this in more depth. I mean, we are a fairly young discipline, and it is an incredibly complex one. It is more complex than engineering because we have people involved much more. It moves fast, so decision makers what's happening or knowing how to manage things. I mean, managing IT projects, I think, is a lot different from managing a bridge building exercise. So I have a lot of experiences, but my talk this afternoon will attempt to at least raise some questions and maybe start us thinking about these things.
Any other? Next question.
Tim Turner from the University of New South Wales, Canberra. A lot of you know me, the rest of you hate. To both sides of the panel, one of the things that occurs to me, and I know I've spoken at some length angrily with Nigel about this at different times, is that work that the academics do which can contribute to a business environment needs to be framed in a way that's useful for business to use. But if it's going to be useful for the academic and their promotional opportunities and their career, it needs to be framed in the way academics use it. And those two things are not the same. They're often quite widely different. So I'm wondering if the panel can provide some ideas about how we might overcome that need to do the same work twice to report on, or at least to report twice on the same one part of work.
Oh, sorry, you go first. You go first.
Ladies first.
Okay. I've been at UNSW Canberra for 8 months now, and I went for the researchers induction in Kensington. And I was actually shocked to find that for me as a very polite researcher, I've got to go and produce all those theoretical outputs. So, as Ed knows too, I don't know how you're going to do both of those. I suspect you might have to do double work to succeed as this pragmatic.
Well, that's a big incentive, isn't it?
No, you want a right answer because, I mean, there isn't, I don't see a shortcut to this. Well, I'm looking at the person sitting next to you. You either become a very good theoretical researcher and you keep doing it and the university will commend you, and hopefully by working with something like you, it transfers some knowledge which you will then apply. That is probably the professor's answer. But sometimes I feel exactly what you're expressing, a frustration. This is a really good piece of hard work, but there's no journal, and there's no ranked journal that's even slightly interested in what I'm doing. And so that's what I'm saying. I had the luxury of being around a bit longer and being allowed to become a professor doing this. But other people better not copy me, because you just won't have there's no way to get the citations.
I've sort of fortunately become Associate Dean Research this year, and so the college now has a focus on industry collaboration. And we started having partnership workshops. And Priscilla John puts up the back here as our first business development manager ever. So just notice this, people, please speak to her. But we're looking at ways to do this, and the only way we've thought of yet is we're going to start producing for our staff a little booklet of stories of people who've managed to do both. And it's not just the IS people, but some of our people in finance are working with government departments and managing to get their data out of the project as well. So we're hoping if we start building up these stories, I mean, Ahmed and I have got one with our Bangladesh project eventually resulted in a top-tier journal article that did take 5 years. So but it can be done. So that's our little suggestion. Maybe other people have got some ideas.
Yes, Cameron had something to say.
So I've got a slightly different perspective. I want to tell you a little story about something that's going on in our organisation. Because we have a relationship with a research organisation which is associated with the university. And they're actually doing lots of research around risk analysis. We have to potentially inspect almost everything that comes into the country. But of course, that's not practical, because you can't so much of it come in. So you've got to make some risk judgment about whether you inspect something or not based upon previous results, the outcome of what the risk might be associated with the product, and therefore you decide whether you inspect 100% or a sample of it. So this organisation has got a terrific model that's actually working, and they want us to put it into an operating environment. So what they don't understand is that they want to put it into the operating environment, which is my IT environment, and fiddle with it as they go. But you know what my answer is, don't you?
No.
You've got no idea.
Yeah.
You've got to put it in that's your development environment, a test environment, and you've got to have a production environment. Probably there's going to be a performance environment somewhere in between. Struggling to get that group of people to understand that I need to set up those three environments before I'm going to let it go in has been a 12-month exercise for my attention. They finally just signed off the paperwork to allow us to create those environments. That's the, in my mind, that's the sort of the other side. What do you need to know? I don't think you need to do twice the work, but possibly an understanding of the difficulties that we face in the process.
you had a hand to.
Yeah, so I've been working with industry for over 10 years. And one
Name
person,
and,
oh yes, I'm Irvin Field. I'm at Queen's University of Technology, but before that I worked for 10 years at a applied research institute in the Netherlands, where I did a lot of work with industry. And maybe a question or suggestion or the opinion of the industry panelists. One of the things I noticed is that there's a real difference if you work with organizations that have a research culture, like a Philips in the Netherlands, that have a big lab, so you can very easily interact with the industry partner, or you work with a pure commercial organization like ING, and you work directly with the operational managers. You have a big knowledge transfer problem there. So what is the goal of, let's say, the industry partners to work on their absorptive capacity of new knowledge, and think a bit about that?
Well, I'll tell you a little story about a really big company called Westpac. And Westpac, we were fiddling around with payments via mobile phones for about 6 years. And I got caught up with Gail Kelvin. And here she is at the cocktail party. I said, what's Westpac doing about micro payments on telephone? She said, oh, you mean stored value accounts. She knew exactly what it was all about. I mean, precisely what it was about. She said, we're a big organisation. When the 15 and 25-year-olds get it right, we'll buy it. And that was their attitude. They weren't going to put money into anything for research or anything. They were just going to wait around until they could buy it. And that's the attitude some organisations have to research.
What we'll do, we'll quickly take the questions and then answer. So there was a question.
Tom Worthington from the Research School of Computer Science. Rather than bridging the chasm you have on the diagram there, should we have academia not create the chasm in the first place? Because academia are the ones who educate the people. Can we teach them to work with industry more at the beginning instead of teaching them, no, you don't want to do anything practical? So, for example, when I have a student doing a project, I say, well, what do you want to be? You want to be a professor? You want to work in industry? How should we tailor the output you produce? I just wonder if our academic side can talk about how they're training people to work better with industry.
We'll take the questions first. Any other comments or questions?
Peter Slattery from UNSW. So with regard to what Tom said, I kind of agree in terms of the importance of educating students. And just one comment I have on that is in UNSW now we're really emphasizing entrepreneurship. And I personally think that's really great. I mean, to understand why projects succeed and fail, you sometimes have to be involved in managing them and give students a chance. And one thought that I have about fixing the chasm between academics and industry is if you could set up some sort of a system like PIVA. I mean, at the moment, one of the problems we have is we have a dysfunctional system. Academics need to publish in journals that will only accept research that is tailored towards academics, and then they make no effort to disseminate this research when they actually get it. They have no interest in doing that. So what we could do is if industry could say we need this problem resolved, academics would express interest in it. Industry would say, okay, I'll finance your research, and then we would have some sort of a journal set up that would be receptive to that. So yeah, I'm accepting offers of funding. So,
any other comments or questions from the audience? So, yeah, please.
A couple of great questions there as well. A couple of observations from I've done bodies of work in the past with a number of different research organisations. There's a common theme that I start to see that goes a little bit to Tim's question and also about to your question over there around how these research institutes organise themselves. A couple of things I see commonly amongst people that are involved in a lot of research in an applied setting. The first of those is that they naturally bring a tendency to want to resolve problems to the nth degree of detail. And they will drive down and look for all sorts of rabbit warrens of interesting questions that need to be answered. But in the project management paradigm, time, quality, and budget, which two do you want? Researchers will always go for quality, and they'll trade off time and budget to achieve it. In a real world practical setting, a good outcome constitutes on time, on budget, yes, to a high degree of quality, and also with a happy set of stakeholders. If you have the first three and still have stakeholders that are not in alignment with what it is you're trying to achieve. Just the first comment is that researchers do have a tendency to try and solve and deliver 100% solution, when in a practitioner world, 80% 80% solution, keep 80% of the people happy 80% of the time, usually is often a better outcome. The second question is one around communication, I think, which is I think at the heart of where we have about 4 or 5 people in our organisation that have PhD backgrounds and they're working in a applied setting. Commonly what we see is that they bring a communication style to the table. It doesn't actually fit in real world context. So the writing is longer, it is more verbose. But it's verbose because they're trying to actually make sure that they've captured the entire argument. More time is spent on describing methodology, for example. More time is spent on wrapping up and summarising conclusions. No good if you're writing a briefing with a minister where you have 5 bullet points to get your message across, and yet it could be exactly the same concept that's being described. So written and communication skills, I think, are a fundamental aspect of how both I think how we teach and also how we apply that, because the industry has an obligation, I think, to start to take on the teaching burden once, as Graham said earlier on, once the graduates join us or the administration join us, we have an obligation to actually train them along those pathways.
And I think we are reaching to the conclusion, so I'll ask them actually how to get there and what the concluding remarks from the level, how can we strengthen this and bridge this gap and actually strengthen our relationship and collaboration. So any concluding remarks from each of you have agreed to this?
Well, great. I'll come back to the comment I made at the beginning, and that's try to identify the problem. If it's a deep problem that needs years of research, that's for the university. Put a team together, collaborative teams with other universities together. That is it. Be prepared to fail. Probably 9 out of 10 things that you try to get commercialised or do or produce will fail. So that's that. The government departments don't like failing. They won't. Like Graham said, he wouldn't even do it unless it was tested all over the place. If you're going to be innovative, if you're going to get management or industry or academia and everybody working together, be prepared. If you do a project, try to solve a problem, you're likely to fail 9 times out of 10. So be prepared for that. But have a go. I mean, it's happening everywhere. These days, the young graduates don't even bother to go to the government or anywhere else. They just get an app going, sell it on iTunes, and make a fortune.
I suppose my last wrap-up comment would be it's all about people and opportunities that fundamentally cross-fertilise knowledge across the academic industry divide are powerful things, and a forum today that's got a set of practitioners on the table answering questions from that perspective is a classic example of that working, I think, in a really strong way.
I'd say come and visit us, come and see us, send your students, come and visit yourself, have a look at what we do. A lot of it's pretty manual labour like that. Despite what you do, slap about what you tested, I am responsible for 5,000 people, $400 million worth of industry per year. Products coming through, and I can't afford to hold them.
So good to note that.
And that was actually going to be my comment to academics. You have to be humble, and if you really want to work with the industry, you have to go and sing. You have to learn what they're doing, why they're doing it, and you have to understand even when they communicate or whatever requirements. You're not going to be able to change all this. Working with policemen, sometimes they just want a simple interface and one button which says print, they still want a print. So this is what they want. And through that, you will learn and grow, and you'll find ways of applying what you learn, and you will tap into lots and lots of funding from other sources that you've never dreamed of, like chosen and Broadway, things like that. Really, it's out there waiting to find your research.
No, I agree. All of you. I think it's up to all of us to take initiatives to make this work. I think, as I said, we're trying now to do it in our college. We had a workshop with the industry, and we were advised to, we were going to present to them what we've done and then get their comment, and someone from the advice said, no, don't do that, get them in and just listen to them. And we had over 20 people come in from quite high-powered organisations, and we were very amazed at the work that was shown. So I think the will is there, we just
Yes, I think we're facing a bit of a shift in paradigm, to use that wonderfully unscientific word. That certainly in academia there is a bit of a change away from the traditional PhDs for promoting people as academics rather than doing actually anything useful. I'm not a cynic, I'm just experienced. Things are, I think, getting a lot better in terms of making sure that what we do is both rigorous and relevant for industry or for society as a large. There's obviously still room for improvement, and partly that's going to be through the performance measurement systems that are used. When academics are still going to be assessed according to how many A or A-star journals they've produced, or what their students produce, then that means that if they're interested in staying in academic circles and being promoted, then that's what they're going to do. The game's people play. If you're interested in other things, especially about making a difference in society outside that circle, then obviously you've got to chase down other avenues which are rewarded different. Things are improving, we still have a way to go, and sessions like today is obviously a good step towards taking that further.
It seems that academics are talking more in favor of industries and who's the winner is decided. So it seems that we are in a consensus that more harmony is required, more teaching is required. So we would like to finish with a tune by our good students, midshipmen.